The classroom hummed with voices and the clatter of desks as sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Casting stripes of light across the floor, the teacher walked in with a stack of papers, balanced carefully in one arm, and nodded toward a seat. At the front of the room, the students shifted nervously in their chairs, some whispering to one another while others pretended to look at their notebooks, but their eyes kept darting toward the corner of the room, where a shadow moved just slightly, almost too quick to notice but enough to catch attention. The girl sitting near the middle of the room glanced up from her notebook, sensing that something was not quite right. Her fingers tapped lightly on the desk, as if she could summon the courage to speak to whatever was hiding there, but the shadow remained silent and still for a moment. It seemed as though it was waiting for the right time to reveal itself, and a chill ran down the girl's spine, not exactly fear, but a strange curiosity that made her heart beat a little faster. Across the room, the teacher smiled, faintly, thinking the students were simply jittery because of the early morning and the sudden shift from the quiet hallway into the bright classroom light. But a flicker of doubt passed through the mind as a small movement caught the corner of the eye. It was fast, almost invisible, like a heartbeat skipping a beat, and yet there was something about the way it moved that did not belong in a classroom, something fluid and deliberate with a rhythm that seemed to follow the pattern of the teacher's own heartbeat. The students whispered to one another, nervously glancing toward the corner, and yet no one could say what exactly had caused the sensation. Some shrugged their shoulders, pretending nothing was there. Others leaned closer to their friends, murmuring guesses about what it could be. A small animal maybe, a lost kitten perhaps, a mouse that had slipped inside through an open window. But deep down, even the bravest of them felt that it was none of these simple explanations, and the girl who had sensed the shadow first felt her pulse quicken, as if she were aware that the moment would change everything. Then the shadow moved again, almost as if it had heard the whispers or felt the tension. It emerged slowly, revealing a sleek body with golden fur that shimmered in the sunlight. It padded lightly across the floor without making a sound, like it was part of the air itself, and when it reached the empty chair beside the girl, it paused, its amber eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her inhale sharply, not because she was afraid but because she could not look away. The rest of the classroom seemed to hold its breath as the small predator cub lowered itself into the chair with surprising grace, curling its tail around the leg of the seat, as though it had always belonged there. The teacher nodded absent-mindedly toward the chair, thinking it was just another lost animal needing care, and yet, in the back of the mind, a tiny alarm bell rang, a warning that something was not as simple as it seemed. The cub's eyes followed every movement in the room with unnerving awareness, and the girl reached out her hand instinctively, and the cub sniffed it carefully before letting its head rest lightly on her arm, in a gesture that was both innocent and strange. And the classroom fell silent for a moment, the air thick with anticipation, as if the very walls were waiting to see what would happen next. The cub's golden eyes blinked slowly, as if measuring the girl's reaction, and the girl leaned a little closer, her fingers brushing against the soft fur of the predator. As the other students shifted nervously in their seats, unsure if they should move closer or stay frozen in place, a faint whisper ran through the classroom, like a ripple across still water, and the teacher turned slightly toward the cub, unaware that the small creature was studying every detail of the room, every movement, every shadow, with an intelligence that seemed beyond what anyone could imagine. The girl whispered softly to the cub words no one else could hear, and the predator tilted its head, listening intently, as if understanding every sound and yet remaining silent. Not a growl, not a hiss, just quiet awareness that sent an odd shiver down the spine of everyone watching. The cub's tail flicked lightly like a pendulum, marking time, and the students exchanged glances, some hiding their hands over their mouths in disbelief, others leaning forward to catch a glimpse of a creature that belonged more in a story than a classroom. The teacher nodded again, oblivious to the depth of the presence, seated so close to the human child. Outside the windows, the wind rattled the panes and made the sunlight flicker across the floor, giving the classroom an almost magical glow. The cub's ears twitched at every sound, as if cataloging the noises and scents. The classroom smelled of paper and chalk and faint perfume, but there was something else. A faint metallic tang that made the hair on the back of the girl's neck stand up. She had never felt anything like it before. And yet there was comfort in the cub's warmth pressed lightly against her arm, a paradox that made her heart race with excitement and unease. Other students began to murmur quietly, their curiosity battling their fear. Some imagined What it would be like if the cub were larger, if it leaped suddenly, if its claws flashed out in a motion too fast to stop, and yet the cub remained calm, seemingly aware of the invisible boundaries of the room, and of the teacher and of the girl who sat beside it, its head resting lightly as if it had chosen her. For some reason no one could guess, the teacher shifted on their feet, writing a note on the board, and glanced back quickly, only to freeze their hand mid-air. The cub's eyes locked onto theirs for a fraction of a second that felt like an eternity, and the sense of something untamed and alive filled the air. The girl laughed softly, a tiny sound that seemed to calm the predator, and it purred almost inaudibly, vibrating against her arm, a sound that was not threatening but carried an energy that made the room feel electric. The sunlight caught on the fine hairs of its fur, giving it a glow that made the classroom look unreal, like a painting come to life. The teacher's breath caught, and the students leaned closer, forgetting their homework, forgetting their whispers, all eyes on the creature that should not have been here, but somehow belonged. The cub shifted slightly, turning its head to scan the classroom. Again, pausing on each desk, on each student, on each line of writing, as if memorizing everything, while the girl stroked its back gently, and whispered again, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold still, the air thick with anticipation, curiosity, and the unspoken knowledge that this encounter was no ordinary morning in a classroom. The cub's head rested lightly on the girl's arm, but its eyes never left the room, scanning every movement as if cataloging everything with quiet precision. The girl shifted slightly in her seat, careful not to startle it, her fingers brushing through the soft fur, and feeling a warmth that was both comforting and strange. The other students whispered softly to each other, some leaning forward to catch glimpses of the creature, others pressing their hands to their mouths, unable to believe what they were seeing. The classroom felt different now, charged with an energy that made the walls seem closer and the air heavier. The teacher returned to the board and wrote slowly, each word feeling strangely distant, as if something had entered the room that could not be controlled. The chalk squeaked softly against the board, and the cub's ears twitched at every sound. It lifted its head and tilted it slightly, as though listening to a rhythm that only it could hear. The girl's hand remained on its back, and a quiet connection passed between them, something unspoken but undeniable that made the cub relax further. And yet, the tension in the classroom did not fade. The other students could feel it like a ripple through the air, a presence that was watching and waiting. A pencil rolled off a desk and clattered to the floor. The cub's head snapped toward the sound, and in a motion so fast it seemed almost unreal, it pawed the pencil, gently pushing it back toward the student. The motion was precise, controlled, and silent, and the classroom collectively exhaled in shock and amazement. Even the teacher froze for a moment, unsure if they had just witnessed a miracle or a warning. The cub returned its attention to the girl, curling slightly into the space beside her like it had found its place in the room. The girl whispered softly again, a word or a phrase that no one could hear, and the cub tilted its head slightly and purred, a soft sound vibrating through the space, a sound that carried authority and innocence at the same time. The students shifted uneasily, some trying to smile, some unable to look away. The teacher finally turned fully toward the cub and froze in place. The golden eyes met theirs, and in that instant the teacher felt a chill run down the spine, a feeling that the creature was aware of everything, even thoughts hidden deep within their mind, a warning or a question, or perhaps both. Outside the windows, a bird flitted past, and the cub's gaze followed it for a heartbeat before returning to the girl. The sunlight highlighted the subtle muscles under its fur, the curves of its tiny paws, and the intensity in its gaze that made it feel ancient and wise beyond measure. The classroom seemed suspended in a moment that stretched time. The ticking of the clock felt slower, the whispers of the students softer, and the teacher's own heartbeat louder, each beat echoing in the stillness. The girl shifted slightly, laughing softly, and the cub responded by nudging her hand with its nose, a gentle gesture that made her giggle, and for a moment the fear in the room softened, replaced by awe and fascination. The students leaned forward, their notebooks, forgotten, their pens still hovering over empty lines, all eyes on the pair that sat at the center of the room, a predator and a human, bound by an unspoken trust that none of them could understand. The cub finally curled fully beside the girl, resting its head on her arm, eyes half closed, still alert but calm, and the teacher felt a twinge of fear mixed with wonder, realizing that this was no ordinary classroom visitor, and that something extraordinary had just stepped into their carefully ordered world. The lesson continued, but the atmosphere in the classroom had shifted in a way that no one could ignore. The cub remained curled beside the girl, its golden eyes half-lidded but still alert, as if it were aware of every heartbeat, every whisper, every small movement around it. The girl kept her hand lightly on its back and whispered softly again, words that no one could hear, and the cub responded with a tiny nudge, or a soft purr that made the students lean forward, their curiosity battling their fear. The teacher moved slowly toward the desk at the front of the room, writing on the board, but their mind was no longer on the lesson. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself were pressing down on them. A faint unease settled in the pit of the stomach, a warning they could not ignore, but the teacher shook their head, trying to dismiss it. Chalk squeaking softly against the board as they wrote letters and numbers, but the cub lifted its head, ears twitching, scanning the room with an intelligence that seemed almost human. A faint sound came from the hallway, the creak of a door opening and closing. The cub's muscles tensed slightly, its tail flicking in a precise rhythm. The students held their breath, uncertain of what might happen. The girl whispered again softly, a single syllable, and the cub relaxed almost instantly, returning its head to her arm, like nothing had disturbed it. Yet, the teacher could not shake the feeling that the cub was measuring everyone in the room, assessing intentions, and perhaps even predicting movements. The students exchanged nervous glances, some smiling nervously, others whispering guesses about what the creature might do next, but the cub did nothing aggressive, nothing threatening. It simply observed with quiet patience and a presence that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, and charged with a strange electricity. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught the fine fur along its back, making it glow, and the shadows across the classroom seemed to shift and dance, as if aware of the being that had entered their midst. A backpack fell from a chair, and the cub reacted in a blur of motion, catching it with a delicate paw and setting it upright again. The motion was precise, careful, deliberate, and silent, and the students gasped softly at the speed and grace of the movement. The teacher froze completely, the chalk slipping from their fingers as their mind raced, unable to comprehend how a creature so small could move with such uncanny control and awareness. The eyes of the cub met theirs for a fraction of a second, golden amber and piercing, and the teacher felt an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability, as if the cub could see into their very thoughts. The girl stroked the cub, gently murmuring once more, and the predator leaned slightly into her hand, a soft vibration emanating from it, almost like a warning, a promise, and an acknowledgement at the same time. The students watched in awe and feared. The teacher swallowed hard, their body rigid, unable to look away from the mesmerizing presence that had claimed a space in their classroom without permission. Yet, without malice, the cub finally settled, fully pressing its body lightly against the girl, the sunlight catching its fur, the classroom silent except for the faint rustle of papers and the soft whisper of the girl. The teacher finally moved toward the desk, but their steps were hesitant, their mind heavy with a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and wonder, realizing that this encounter was no ordinary event, and that the predator beside the girl was not merely an animal but something far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The lesson continued, but the rhythm of the classroom had changed. The cub's golden eyes followed every movement, every flick of a pen, every shuffle of a chair, and the students felt as if they were under its gaze, their own movements becoming cautious, tentative, as if they might anger a creature far beyond their understanding. The girl remained calm, her hand resting lightly on its fur, whispering softly words no one else could hear, and the cub tilted its head, listening attentively before curling slightly closer to her, like a living shield protecting her from some unseen threat. The teacher returned to the front of the room, trying to maintain control of the lesson, but the words felt hollow. The chalk squeaked against the board, each stroke interrupted by a flicker of awareness that made them glance repeatedly at the cub, its posture so still yet so alert. It was impossible to read, yet impossible to ignore. The students shifted uneasily, whispering softly, their curiosity and fear intertwining with the strange calm emanating from the girl and the creature beside her, a tension that stretched the air thick with anticipation, and the faint sound of the clock ticking seemed to echo louder with each second. A pencil rolled off a desk and clattered onto the floor. The cub reacted instantly, its body moving with a fluid grace. It caught the pencil lightly between its tiny paws and placed it upright on the desk without a sound. The students gasped softly, some covering their mouths, unable to believe what they had seen. The teacher froze mid-step, chalk in hand, realizing that every motion of the cub was deliberate, precise, and intelligent, beyond the realm of ordinary animals, and for a moment the room held its breath, caught in a fragile balance between awe and fear. The girl leaned forward, speaking softly again, her voice barely audible, and the cub responded by nudging her hand gently with its nose, its purr vibrating through the quiet classroom, a sound that was calming, yet charged with unspoken energy. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught on the edges of its fur, casting golden highlights that made the creature appear almost ethereal. The students could not tear their eyes away, their notebooks forgotten, their pens suspended in mid-air. The teacher's heart raced, a mixture of fascination and unease, growing heavier with each passing second. Outside the windows, the wind rattled, the panes a faint rustle of leaves, and the cub's ears twitched, its gaze flicking briefly toward the sound before returning to the girl. It was as if the creature was cataloging every detail of its surroundings, every scent, every noise, every subtle shift in the room. The students whispered softly, trying to make sense of what they were witnessing, a predator so small, yet so commanding. The girl stroked its back softly, and it leaned into her hand, a gesture both intimate and unsettling. The teacher shifted nervously at the front of the room, feeling the weight of eyes on them, not just human eyes, but the piercing awareness of the cub, as if it could read every thought, every fear, every secret worry held deep inside. A chill ran down the spine. The room felt smaller, tighter, the air thick with anticipation, and the students sat frozen in a mixture of awe and fear. The cub finally settled slightly, curling against the girl, its head resting lightly, and yet the energy in the room did not diminish. The quiet tension remained, as if the creature had claimed a space not just beside the girl but in the hearts and minds of everyone present. The classroom had grown quieter, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The cub remained curled beside the girl, its golden eyes occasionally flicking toward the other students, who shifted nervously in their seats, each whisper and rustle sounding louder than before. The girl continued to stroke the soft fur, gently speaking words no one else could hear, and the cub responded with tiny vibrations that resonated through her arm, a sound that was soothing yet carried a strange sense of power that made the room feel electric. A sudden noise came from the far corner. A book slid off a desk and hit the floor with a soft thud. The cub lifted its head instantly, and in a motion so swift and precise that it seemed impossible, it pawed the book, gently pushing it back upright again. The students gasped softly, their eyes wide, their pens forgotten on the desks. The teacher froze completely, the chalk slipping from their fingers, a shiver running down their spine, as the full awareness of the cub's abilities settled in. It was no ordinary animal. Its movements were controlled, deliberate, intelligent, as if it understood the delicate balance of the classroom, and the fragile trust it had formed with the girl beside it. The girl whispered again softly, her voice like a lullaby, and the cub leaned into her, hand purring quietly, the vibration filling the small space between them, a presence that was both protective and commanding. It lifted its head once and looked toward the teacher, as if studying their intentions, and the teacher felt their chest tighten, a mixture of fascination, fear, and disbelief coursing through every nerve, their heartbeat echoing loudly. In the quiet classroom, the students could barely look away, their curiosity battling their unease, each subtle motion of the cub captivating their attention, its ears twitching at the faintest sound, its tail flicking gently, the sunlight catching on its fur giving it an almost glowing appearance. The cub's gaze seemed to catalog everything, every whisper, every rustle, every heartbeat, making the room feel charged with a strange energy that no one could explain. A faint draft blew through the open window, the leaves outside rustling, and the cub's ears perked instantly, its body tense for a fraction of a second before it relaxed and returned to the girl, its gaze unwavering, as if it had recognized that nothing outside posed a threat. Yet the presence it carried remained intense, commanding attention from everyone in the room. The girl stroked the cub soothingly, murmuring softly again, and it responded with tiny movements of approval, small adjustments of its paws, and a subtle shift of its weight that made the room feel alive with anticipation. The teacher took a cautious step forward, their mind racing with questions they could not voice. The cub followed every motion with piercing amber eyes, its head tilting slightly, as if weighing intentions and measuring the boundaries of the classroom. The students exchanged glances, whispers, barely audible, their own excitement and fear mingling into a tense energy that filled every corner of the room. The predator beside the girl seemed both harmless and dangerous, a paradox that held everyone suspended in a fragile balance between awe and trepidation. The cub finally rested its head fully against the girl's arm, eyes half closed yet still alert, and the room felt impossibly still, the air heavy with anticipation, curiosity, and fear, as if the presence of this small predator had rewritten the rules of Everything the students sat, frozen, their notebooks forgotten, the teacher rigid with awareness, and the girl simply stroked the soft fur, her calmness a tether holding the extraordinary creature, and everyone else in a delicate harmony that could shift at any moment. The teacher turned back to the board trying to write, but their hand hovered mid-air, chalk trembling between their fingers. The cub's gaze locked onto them for a heartbeat that stretched endlessly, making the teacher feel exposed, as if every thought, every intention had been laid bare before the golden eyes that seemed to pierce through more than just skin the students held. Their breath, leaning forward in their seats, unable to tear their eyes away from the small predator that commanded the room without a sound, the girl whispered softly to the cub a word or a phrase that none of the others could hear, and the cub tilted its head in response, leaning slightly into her hand, purring a quiet vibration that resonated through her arm, and into the classroom itself, a sound that was not threatening, but carried an authority that made the teacher's chest tighten and the students shiver simultaneously. At the power of something so small yet so commanding, the cub's tail flicked once, then twice, with deliberate precision, signaling awareness and control of everything happening around it. A faint creak came from the hallway, and the cub's ears twitched immediately, its body stiffening. Just slightly, the students gasped softly, their eyes wide as the predator's gaze swept across the room, assessing every corner, every shadow, every movement, as if it were cataloging threats and allies. At the same time, the teacher swallowed hard, their pulse racing, each heartbeat echoing in their ears, the chalk slipping further from their fingers as a sudden realization washed over them that this was no ordinary animal but a creature of intelligence, cunning, and instinct that could read the room and judge intent in a way that humans could not. The girl remained calm, her hand stroking the cub, gently whispering in a low tone, and the predator shifted its weight closer, pressing lightly against her side, a protective gesture that contrasted sharply with its alertness and the intensity in its eyes. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught the fine hairs along its back, giving it an almost ethereal glow. The students could hardly look away, mesmerized by the way the creature combined innocence and danger into a single presence that filled every inch of the room with energy. A notebook fell from the edge of a desk, and the cub reacted instantly, pawing it upright without breaking the rhythm of its gaze. The students gasped again, some leaning forward to whisper guesses, others pressing their hands over their mouths in disbelief. The teacher froze entirely, finally understanding that every movement, every reaction of this predator was deliberate, calculated, precise, and beyond the capabilities of ordinary animals. The golden eyes seemed to weigh them, considering every possible action, assessing the boundaries of control and consequence. The girl laughed softly, a tiny musical sound that seemed to calm the cub slightly, and it purred, vibrating softly, the room seeming to exhale in response. Yet the intensity did not leave the eyes of the creature. It scanned the students once more, then the teacher, before settling slightly against the girl, its head resting lightly on her arm, but still alert. The classroom hung in a suspended silence filled with all curiosity and an unmistakable undercurrent of fear. The teacher felt their body go rigid, a chill running down their spine. The students leaned forward, their notebooks abandoned, the air thick with tension, anticipation, and a strange electricity that seemed to pulse from the cub to the girl to every corner of the room. And for the first time, the teacher realized that nothing in this room would ever be ordinary again, and that the predator beside the girl was far more than a creature. It was an intelligence, a force, and a presence that had claimed the room without permission and would not relinquish it. Easily the cub shifted slightly, pressing its body closer to the girl, resting its head lightly on her arm. While its golden eyes remained sharp and watchful, the girl continued to stroke the soft fur, whispering words that no one else could hear, and the predator responded with tiny vibrations of its purr, a sound that seemed to fill the room with a strange warmth yet carried an edge of warning that made every student sit straighter in their chairs. The teacher's chest tightened as a chill ran down their spine. The presence of the cub was more commanding than anything they had ever experienced, a creature so small holding so much power without a single sound. The classroom was silent, except for the faint rustle of papers, the whisper of the girl, and the subtle vibration of the cub's purr. The sunlight streaming through the windows caught on the tips of its fur, giving it an almost glowing appearance. The students could not tear their eyes away, some leaning forward, their mouths slightly open, others pressing their hands to their desks, unable to believe what they were witnessing. The cub's gaze flicked from student to student, as if taking note of every heartbeat, every movement, every intention, and the teacher felt their own thoughts laid bare in the amber intensity of those eyes. A pencil rolled off a desk, the clatter sounding louder than it should have. The cub reacted instantly, its body moving with fluid grace, catching the pencil between its paws and setting it upright again, so smoothly, so deliberately, that it seemed impossible. The students gasped softly, their pens suspended mid-air, and the teacher froze in place, finally realizing that the intelligence in the cub was beyond comprehension. It did not act on impulse, it acted on understanding, assessing the environment and the people within it, before choosing a course of action, each movement precise, each glance calculated. The girl whispered again, softly, a single syllable, and the cub leaned into her hand slightly, a subtle motion, but one that seemed to convey both recognition and trust. The students exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to interpret the calm between the girl and the predator, some whispering guesses while others simply watched in awe. The teacher took a cautious step forward, but the cub's eyes followed each motion with an intensity that made the teacher's chest tighten, as if warning them that every action mattered, and that the balance of the room depended on respect for the creature beside the girl. Outside the windows, the wind shifted, rustling the leaves, and the cub's ears flicked instantly, a slight stiffening of the body before relaxing once it was clear there was no threat. Its awareness of the environment was absolute yet controlled, making the room feel alive with tension and anticipation. The girl continued to stroke its back, whispering softly, and the predator responded with small shifts of its paws, tiny adjustments of weight, and a gentle nudge that sent an electric thrill through the classroom. The sunlight highlighted the subtle muscle movements beneath its fur and the aura of quiet dominance it radiated. The students were captivated, their notebooks forgotten, their pens hovering mid-air, each movement of the cub commanding attention. The teacher's heartbeat echoed in their ears as realization set in that this was no ordinary creature. The predator beside the girl was intelligent, aware, calculating, and connected in a way that no human could fully understand. Yet the girl remained calm, a tether grounding the extraordinary presence, and the classroom seemed suspended in a fragile harmony, a balance that could shatter with the slightest misstep. Finally, the cub rested fully against the girl, its head lightly pressed to her arm, yet its eyes remained open, alert, vigilant, and commanding. The room held its breath, the students silent and tense, and the teacher rigid with a mixture of fear, fascination, and awe, realizing that in this moment the ordinary rules of the classroom had disappeared, replaced by the undeniable presence of something extraordinary and alive. The cub pressed its head fully against the girl's arm, settling into a position that was both protective and intimate, its golden eyes still scanning the classroom with quiet intensity. The girl whispered softly, stroking its fur, and the predator responded with a low vibration, a purr that resonated through the air, filling the room with a sense of calm, yet carrying an edge of power that made every student sit straighter, their breaths shallow, and their eyes wide with awe. The teachers stood frozen at the front of the room, chalk slipping from their fingers, unable to comprehend how a creature so small could command such presence. A chill ran down their spine, their mind racing with the realization that nothing in this room was ordinary anymore. Every instinct they had about control and order had been rendered irrelevant by the calm authority of the cub and the quiet trust it shared with the girl, its companion, its chosen human. The students whispered softly to each other, their voices trembling with excitement and fear, some leaning forward, unable to look away, others pressing their hands to their mouths in disbelief. The cub shifted slightly, its ears flicking toward the faintest sound in the room, then returning to the girl, a subtle movement that conveyed reassurance and vigilance at the same time. The girl smiled faintly, her calmness a tether grounding the extraordinary presence beside her, making the predator seem almost like an extension of herself, a bond forged silently without words. Soft breeze came through the open window, rustling papers and curtains, and the cub lifted its head briefly, its eyes flicking to the window, then back to the girl, and the teacher felt a surge of awe mixed with fear. The predator's awareness of everything in the room, every movement, every breath, every intention, was staggering. A creature so small, yet so intelligent, so attuned to the world, that it seemed almost supernatural. The students shifted in their seats, unable to fully grasp the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The girl continued to whisper softly, and the cub responded with tiny movements of approval, a shift of its weight, a gentle nudge of its paw, and the students leaned forward, entranced by the quiet display of connection and understanding. The teacher's heart pounded in their chest, their mind swirling with questions, none of which could be answered in words, only felt in the intensity of the presence beside the girl, a predator, and a human bound by something invisible yet undeniable. The sunlight caught the cub's fur, highlighting every fine strand, every curve of muscle, and the golden glow seemed almost magical. The classroom felt suspended in time, as if the normal rules of reality had been altered by the bond between girl and predator. The students sat motionless, their notebooks forgotten, pens hovering in the air, the teachers breathing shallow each moment, stretching longer than possible as they realized fully that this encounter had changed everything and would never be forgotten. Finally, the cub curled completely against the girl, resting its head lightly on her arm, its eyes half closed but alert, its presence still commanding the room. The girl stroked its back, whispering a quiet word, and the predator responded with a subtle vibration that filled the space with an energy that was both comforting and thrilling. The teacher swallowed hard, their body rigid with awe and fear, and the students leaned forward, entranced by the quiet spectacle. A predator and a human sharing a silent bond in the midst of an ordinary classroom. Yet nothing about this day would ever feel ordinary again. The room held its breath, the air thick with anticipation, wonder, and a touch of fear. The extraordinary presence of the cub beside the girl had rewritten the rules of the classroom, and for a moment everyone understood that some connections could transcend understanding, bridging worlds that had never met, and that some encounters were far more than they seemed at first glance. A predator and a human, sharing a quiet, unspoken understanding, and the teacher, realizing fully that nothing would ever be the same,